So I'm kind of bummed because I wrote a whole thing about police. You know, I listened to a discussion the other day, and it was the usual cleavage in the universe that seems to believe that there are people who are born with an evil gene who will be criminal, and that we need policemen to protect us from this crowd. And it's interesting because I really like cops. Um, I mean, not as a concept, but the ones I've encountered as human beings, I do. But I'm white and male, the constant caveat. Um, and but I find that a lot of them are really quite thoughtful about the world that they live in. They often fall for some cavernous cliches, but then so do we all. As per this discussion the other day, I cannot remember that Matt somebody. Anyway, he kept talking about how we need to have these people because we want to live in a safe society. And I thought, well, I'm not sure how you live how anybody lives in a safe society when you have a rather small percentage of people who have access to the huge proportion of the huge share of the resources, and the rest of us are left to kind of make do as we can. And I don't know that that was the plan. It didn't seem to be the dream. Even when I was a kid, it seemed to be the notion, that everybody would kind of catch up a little bit, and you'd still have inequality, but it wouldn't be this vast chasm. And probably also that the very, very rich would not would not abscond and remove themselves from society, a place where they might spend a lot and therefore redistribute the wealth in that way. In fact, the redistribution of wealth has been upwards towards the 1%. This is just facts. And we can argue about how these people deserve this inordinate, unequal share, but that doesn't really matter. Anyway, I suppose that his point would be that the status quo being what it is, we need to have policing, and in my mind it came up with, well, yeah, it just everything kind of changes quite a lot if they have guns. Not to get into a discussion about firearms, but it seems to me that if you have a current interpretation of the Second Amendment, so you have a heavily armed citizenry, it stands to reason that you have an armed police force, and there you are. So then you make your moralities and you make your laws and your restrictions and your rituals and your philosophies around that notion that it's a rat race, it's a man's world, or whatever it is. And there are going to be people, for instance, it's hard to make the argument that the very, very rich at this particular moment, or ever really in the history of the world, got there by dint of virtue. I know Christianity works real hard on that notion. I didn't know this. I heard the other day that a big thing about the Puritans was that they, some of the Calvinists have this notion that if you are wealthy, it means you're blessed by God and you're more likely to go to heaven, which kind of runs contrary to various other Jesus myths and eyes of, camels going through the eye of a needle and stuff. But anyway, just that idea that that the social order is natural, and that we have people who are talented and therefore wealthy, and we have a dissatisfied community of people who want to get there by shortcuts. And I can't think of a greater shortcut to wealth than dividends and or what do you call it, Bitcoin, those kinds of things. You're not, those people are not becoming wealthy because they are producing anything or employing a bunch of people to produce something that is actually useful to the rest of us. In other words, we have a merit philosophy. We don't have a worth philosophy. Merit is something that is in the eye of the beholder. Worth, what usefulness you what use you are to the community, how you aid the tribe that we all live in, the big one, is not valued at all, because otherwise it would be high school teachers and nurses and cops who would be at the very least adequately paid, which they're not. But anyway, so it was an interesting thing and I keep hearing this thing, and it's more to do with me than it is to do with the people that I'm hearing, is that there is a sort of an acceptance, and I guess it's in the school system, that these two classes exist, that there are good people and there are bad people, and that bad people can be rehabilitated, that they can come out of whatever cesspool they come out of. And in fact, in my understanding, in my experience of say, the world through the history of plays, for example, Shakespeare as another example, as a great big body of work that anybody can dig into for no money, is that he seemed to be quite comfortable with the notion, and I heard it reflected today, is that somebody was talking about this class of people, the aristocracy or the rulers of the world, since whenever, not since that far in the past. A lot of libertarian types will insist that everything began with the Age of Kings, which is probably about 10,000 years ago, 11,000 years ago, around about the time of agriculture. And before that, we had a different arrangement. We don't know what it is because it's hard to find out. So we generally have to use our imagination. But we have, at some point, we came up with this, we chose this system of authoritarians, of, singularly blessed, anointed, maybe. In some context, they may be the meanest motherfucker in the valley, and if they're Mongols or whatever it is. But we have this, we created this idea. But we created it. It wasn't thrust upon us. That's a notion that we all came up with. And then pretty much thereafter, you have this thing which culminated, in my mind, most ferociously with the Victorians, which is just 150 years ago, who were really solid on this notion that probably most people were born depraved, and only by dint of castor oil and workhouses could the poor virtuous community, the aristocracy, it wasn't really a middle class yet, only by their ministrations could these vile people be lifted. And it seems to me that that's a concept that remains. And I've found in my experience, anyway, so Shakespeare's thing, because I know something about Shakespeare, he seemed very clear that the royals that he wrote a lot about would have been the psychopathic community. So in a sense, our civilization is the result of being of the beck and call and the machinations of psychotics. So it lends quite a lot of weight to the notion that we really need to start, instead of assuming a status quo and reacting to it, we might, and it is an imaginative act, we might just say, we are not that. We are something other than that, and start from there.